Welcome to the Talking with Tech podcast. My name's Chris Bouguet, and I'm here with the one, the only, Rachel Nadel. What's going on, Rachel?
Hey, Chris. I have some things to share today, or some questions that I'd like to talk about with you.
All right.
You
let's
down?
Do it. Let's dive in. Yeah, I'm down.
Okay. So this has come up a lot for me this last week, and I was like, I'm going to talk to Chris about this on the podcast because I'm seeing it over and over again. And so basically what I'm seeing is this idea. Well, let me start with a story. So I was contacted by a mom on Instagram, which happens a lot. Like, here's my current AAC situation. I've listened to your podcast. I've watched your content. I appreciate it. I feel like my child needs robust language.
She's right.
And I'm like, good. Yes, great. I'm happy that's the message that I'm conveying, and everyone's picking up on that message that I'm putting down. So she's like, and then of course, the second part of the story, and I'm talking about one mom, but I could be talking about 50 moms because this happens a lot. Current situation is that her child doesn't have access to robust systems, and they're being denied access, essentially. And this specific situation that I'm referencing, child profile, just really quickly, I think around 3.5, diagnosis of autism, no real issues with fine motor. Child was put on a Big Mac switch. And my first question is like, okay, where are the access issues that this child's having that like we would need some type of switch? Then, of course, I like talk to this mom, like getting more information. I'm like, I really don't think this is appropriate. I'm like, send me a little clip of like your child like using YouTube. And of course it was like, bam, 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 got it. I'm like, okay. So like I suspected that there was no access issues. There are no access issues. And so I'm like, why? Why are we doing a single message button, essentially? And this was like, this specific situation, it was like, more please. And the child wasn't using it appropriately. And they're like, we need to get this cause and effect before we do anything else. Then after I heard this story and I was appalled, then I'm on Facebook, literally the same day. And this post on one of the Facebook groups was like, just got, a 12-year-old kid with autism on my caseload, not speaking. Like, what do I do? And like one of the first comments was like, have you tried cause and effect and or switches? And I'm like, what is this? And so, Chris, am I like in the wrong here? Like, am I like thinking crazy that like, why are we using switches with kids who don't have access issues?
No, you're not in the wrong.
Because I'm like, I started questioning myself. I was like, wait a second. Like, am I in the wrong here? I don't know what's happening.
Wow. Okay. So there's so much to unpack there. So clearly, if you've listened to this podcast at all before this episode, you're going to know our feelings on these situations, right? The bigger question is, how do you not know yet? Like, how do you not know that that's not appropriate? And I'm trying to check myself because I'm always nervous that I'm going to devolve into some sort of complain fest about the way things are, right? And that I don't want our podcast to become that, and I don't want to be that person. I want to be the person that comes up with solutions. But what the heck, man? You know what I mean? Like, when you're telling me that story, I was thinking, is it 1992? Like, did you climb in a DeLorean and go back in time? That is so an old way of thinking about it, and we've learned and we've come many people have learned and come so far from understanding that. It's such an ancient concept to do it that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think, because I'm thinking like, what would be the rationale behind this? I needed to like really like step outside of like what I do and be like, okay, what could I possibly think of would be a rationale for having a single message button for a child who has no access issues? And don't get me wrong, there's a time and a place for that when you are dealing with a child with access issues, teaching this idea of cause and effect and having something really great happen, like turning on music or a switch adapted toy. Great. Like, let's teach that function. And also, let me just like go back. This child has already demonstrated that they can use a picture exchange system. So they've already demonstrated that they have this idea of cause and effect. Like, I give a picture to ask for the things that I want. So like that has already been established with this child. So I just don't get it. Like, I just don't understand it. Like, it feels like people are following this like prescribed journey of AAC that's like, okay, first we do this, and then we do this, and then we do this. And I just like don't understand it.
Well, it makes me think that the people that put that sort of system in place have not done any professional learning, because I don't even know where you'd go to learn about how to do an approach like that anymore. You know, every organization that I am a part of, that I see advertise and I can't be a part of because of time constraints or financial constraints or whatever, nobody is advocating for that sort of approach anymore. Everyone is talking about robust language systems. Everyone's talking about how to do that in the most effective way. People are wrestling with this concept of how do we teach kids to read and be literate. Like, we're at that stage in this evolutionary process of where we are. So it's almost like you haven't actively done any professional learning in the realm of language development or AAC in the last certainly 10 years, 15 years. I mean, for sure.
Yeah, it's almost like you're like, wait, what was the movie, Chris, where I think it's like Will Ferrell. I think it's Old School. Do you remember that movie where he's like earmuffs to his kid, and he like puts earmuffs? That's what it reminds me of. Someone like did earmuffs for the last 10 years and like refused to take any new and current information about AAC best practice.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you know what's something that keeps coming up in my framework recently, or my framework, again, it's not the right word, but it keeps coming up in my sphere of influence. Part of it is listening back to our podcast episodes, but also listening to other podcasts. So, for instance, we just had Kim Albrecht on the podcast, and I've been listening to the series that she's put out on her Loma podcast, and it's all about AAC and it's all about literacy. And repeatedly, it's stories about parents who have done things because the professionals meant to help them didn't. And that's what it seems like here. This is a mom reaching out to you saying, this doesn't feel right to me. What am I doing? I need another piece of advice, because again, the profession hasn't moved fast enough. Hopefully we are on the tail end of this, we're maybe riding the comet and she's at the back end of the comet tail. You know what I mean? I hope that's the case. But I don't know. I don't know how to get a barometer on that.
Well, the good news is I met with this mom. We had a Zoom meeting and I was like, listen, here's what I need to teach you. Here's what you can try. Here's what you need to advocate for. And so I feel like I could at least do a little bit to help. But it's just like, it's very disheartening because I feel like I'm up against a battle of speech language pathologists, and it's just like, can't we all like be doing best practice and what we know? And I think there's a lot of misinformation out there still. It's so hard for me because I just think there's so many families out there like this family, and a lot of them contacted me, but think about all the families who haven't, and are just like knowing that there's more for their child and having professionals not do the right thing and to not give access to more language.
Mm-hmm. Well, you use the phrase a lot of misinformation out there. And I wonder if there's a lot of misinformation like on social media, or if people are just not going to the right places to get their information. Like I mentioned, I don't know that there's a lot of misinformation from big organizations or something, but maybe it's like these one-off giving advice that is where the misinformation comes about.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we're on the pulse of the AAC sphere of influence. Like, we have talked to all of the thought leaders in AAC and watched their presentations, and I'm not saying anybody spread misinformation. So I think it perhaps is like two things. I think one, social media, it's like you go there sometimes to just validate your own line of thinking. So it's like, there's going to be at least one person here who agrees with me when I post this, and so that's like enough validation to keep doing what I'm doing. The second layer of this, I believe, is this is the way I've always done it, and this is always the way I'm going to do it. And it doesn't matter what information I get, that's wrong information, and this is the way I've always done it, and this is where I've seen success.
Mm-hmm. And I get great feedback on my evaluations from my supervisors, or from whoever my my superior is, so why should I change? And 2, I've convinced myself that the evidence suggests this works because when I look at my data, assuming we're collecting data, the student then, they're now hitting the Big Mac. And so they went from not hitting a Big Mac, and so my score, my data says 0, and now they're hitting the Big Mac 25% of the time. Progress, So my evidence suggests that it works. But if you don't have the end game in mind of a comprehensive, snug, spontaneous novel utterance generation, being able to say whatever you want to say, however you want to say it, to whomever you want to say it, if you don't have that in mind, then the data doesn't mean a hill of beans,
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's just, it's so frustrating because I always think about this too. We have so much work to do with our kids with complex communication needs. There's so many things that we could work on and teach them. And it's just like, we really have our work cut out for us. And I'm like ready to like roll my sleeves up and get in there. And so when I see wasted time, when I see something that I'm like, we're spending all this energy on something that, this is not a long-term system for this student. So why would we spend all this energy teaching the system when instead we can take all that energy, find a long-term solution, and start building skills for that long-term solution? So it's just very frustrating to me. I'm like, stop wasting time. We only have so much time and it's limited and we have a lot to do. So we need to make sure that we're prioritizing goals, and especially when we're thinking about AAC selection, finding a system that's long-term. I've talked a little bit about like early intervention, sometimes doing like a stepping stone AAC, like, hey, download this free AAC speech generating app just to like see how it goes. I'm all about that, but I'm always clear, this is a stepping stone tool. This is like one thing we're going to do, but then eventually we're going to do this other thing that's more long-term. And I feel like we get stuck in these systems that aren't robust, and we're waiting for kids to show us proficiency with those systems, and sometimes that proficiency doesn't come, and it's just like, what a waste of time.
Mm-hmm. Deep breaths.
I know. I'm going to drink more of my coffee and meditate after this.
A strategy that I try and give myself when I'm feeling this way is understanding that, and it's really hard, but understanding that these systems of change take decades, not years, maybe is the way to put it, because it's such a slow change. But if you look back a decade ago, we have come so far. So when I look back and I climb in my DeLorean and I go back in time, I think where at least I was professionally and where the people that I talk to, we have moved so far, and I count that as a win.
And it also goes to this idea of training out our pre-service SLPs. I feel like we have such an opportunity to make a huge difference with all of those clinicians who are in graduate school doing their CFY. I feel like I've seen a lot of really great young clinicians know a lot about AAC, and I feel like very inspired by that, because it feels like this new generation of speech language pathologists, they're tech savvy, they're understanding the need for robust language systems and the idea of core words and native language input and all these things. I know, Chris, we've gotten a lot of emails from college professors who say they use our podcast in their AAC course or the coursework that they have their students do. So that does give me hope that things are changing and evolving, and you're right. I need to be more patient. Things do take time, and they have evolved, and they're going to continue to evolve.
Why it's so hard to be so patient is because we care about the people we work with right now, and we're helping the people we work with right now. But the big systemic change that we'll see will really not necessarily benefit the people we're working with right now. It'll benefit the people 10 years from now, and it's not the kids we're working with right now. It's the kids of the kids we're working with right now that will really reap the benefits, that will really, what's that phrase, standing on the shoulders of giants. Do you know what I mean? They'll be in a whole different world. And every step we take in that direction gets us there faster.
100%.
So, ready for the interview today?
Tell me about it.
So this is part 2 with Amy Fleischer and Corinne Nelson. They reached out to talk about the specific language system first approach and how they might embrace that in their neck of the woods and what that might look like. And so part 1 was last week and part 2 is coming right up.
Are you enjoying this episode? We would love for you to take a few minutes to hit the subscribe button so you always know when we release new content. Even better, if you leave us a review on iTunes, then more people will find this podcast and learn about AAC. We also love reading your reviews on air. Thank you so much for your support. We love this community. Now we can head back into the episode.
Corinne, Amy, you might be familiar with this, but Corinne, so I familiarize you with where my thought process is on this is that we've moved away from doing individual evaluations for a lot of tech, including AAC. And what we do instead is doing sort of trials, because I think there's some, like I already mentioned, some problems with trials. But instead, what we do is a collaborative decision-making process where someone brings up the question of, we think a student needs X. In this case, we'll talk about AAC. We think a student needs AAC. Great. What should it be? We have a meeting that involves as many stakeholders as possible, including the parents, including the, or this is what I advocate for anyway, is for the parents to be there and maybe any private practitioners to be there. And we say, okay, we know we want a student to have AAC. What are the considerations here? Well, we know we need robust language system. Let's put that on the list. You see my fictional chart over here, Corinne, behind me, right? So this is the first column here. See my little row over here? It's column number 1. So you're filling out column number 1, and the first column is, well, we know we need robust access to language. We want to keep the buttons in the same spot. Does the student speak other languages? Well, then let's make sure that the system we're looking for has a language, that supports that second language. And one of the things on that consideration can be, what's the training look like? How familiar are the people supporting the student with this particular application? It doesn't need to be the determining factor, but it could be a factor that you're considering. And you make this list of all the things you'd like to consider. And then you have these columns to the right that say Prolo Quo, LAMP Words for Life, Touch Chat, Snap Plus Core First, whatever the other applications might be. And you see which one comes out in the wash. For that particular student. And this way, everyone has a voice in the selection process. The implementation goes up because we all own the decision making. It wasn't like this was imposed on us by somebody else. And then you just pick. And that's the thing we're running with, which provides a level of consistency across the board. Well, we all went through this process, and this is what we selected. You have the evidence to demonstrate, to back up your claim of why you think this should be the tool you chose by showing this little chart that you filled out. Do you know what I mean? So when anyone goes back and goes, well, how did you pick Prolo Quo? Well, it was in the environment already. Really? That's how you picked it? Well, actually, we had a collaborative decision-making process that where all the stakeholders were involved. And if you did that consistently for a year, again, that might be another way to see what comes out in the wash. You'd say, okay, well, we're not immediately adopting this approach, but we've done, 15, 20 of these across our district. And what we see now is that this particular device, this particular app comes out of the wash most frequently. And then the third way to kind of establish what you could choose is to get some stakeholders together and say, okay, maybe we should consider this approach. What would the app be? We get a Corinne, we get a teacher who works at the secondary level, we get an administrator, we get a bunch of people in a room, and we make a decision that way. Which could be another way you make kind of a global decision. So, what are your thoughts on all of that?
I could imagine trying to take just a first stab at that chart with the group of SLPs. Maybe if we have the opportunity down the road to include teachers, actually, I could bring it to our life skills teachers to try and come to more shared understanding about the pros and cons of each system without considering specific students. But I actually really like that idea, Chris, that maybe we take a year and we try to implement the same process and then make assessments. Because actually, I was thinking about how eager I am to help revise the system, but I lack context and experience in this system. And I think trying to do it before I actually get to know the stakeholders would be a problem. And so maybe this is a structured way to work towards the goal of more coherence using our 15 to 20 specific students whom we took this approach with to see what came out in the wash.
Amy, I'll even add that process that I'm talking about there is not unique to AAC. That's sort of where we go for all resource. We call it resource consideration, right? Not even assistive technology. Just we think the kid needs something. Well, okay, let's talk about what the needs are, and then we can lay out the possible tools that will meet that need. But doing that, AAC is one of the things we're having the most frequent conversations about. What do you think, Corinne?
Sorry, I do want to hear what Corinne thinks. I just want to say I've tried to make that AT considerations process more easier to do with, just something where it's more consistent. But what I found is each team needs something different. And so I don't see that the same table or the same process works for each team. So I'm a little cautious about thinking that that's easy.
Oh, yeah, it's definitely not easy. And it's also a skill for you to learn to facilitate that process, because if there's such a thing as an AT person, we're often taught to be the fixer. Like, we bring you in to do the evaluation to tell us what we need, as opposed to guide us for us making our decisions together,
Sure.
And it's a hard hat for us to take off, because taking that, sometimes they choose stuff that we wouldn't necessarily think is the right thing, So, Corinne, what do you think about that whole process in relation to AAC and making a selection, process using a facilitated collaborative experience like that?
I think that's a really good idea. It makes me curious about what actually is being used out there. I have my own personal experience and I've been in a few different buildings, but I don't know what another SLP, what her AAC use looks like at another school. And so right now it makes me want to go back and just pool and see what is realistically being used. And I think even if we were to do that, I think there's levels of use. The kid has access to it. The kid we're modeling it, but he's not really using it, or he's using it consistently. And even amongst those, I think there's even more levels. And I'd be curious just what my SLP group is doing. I think a collaborative model would go over better in my district than a team comes in and says, use this. Mm-hmm. I think a slow transition will work better. And then the other thing is, and I don't want to discredit Amy, but my mentality, and I would imagine others in the district, of her job is more, get me the app I need. I have a tech question. And I'm not, and that's just, I think, our naivety and just the fact that our district hasn't really explained what your role is. And she came in and she is fighting against that, and in a good way. And I think you are letting us know, like, hey, I'm here for more than just that. I can do more than just push your request to the right people. And so I feel like Amy has a little bit of an uphill battle, like you mentioned, Chris, of just informing and educating the staff of what her role can be and what you can do. And I'm happy to help advocate with you for that, or be an example of what you can do in a school. But just giving you a background of what I think we kind of saw her position as.
Yeah, that's not atypical, actually. I think there's a lot of school districts around, a lot of teachers, a lot of people that, I'm going to put it in air quotes, an AT person supports, that see the AT person as like Gopher from the Muppets. You know what I mean? You get something, and yeah. We're not Amazon. Do you know what I mean? I think the AT people would say we're not Amazon. We could build some sort of database where you can get and we can have the mail system deliver what you want. That if we want to do that, our expertise is helping you select. You know,
and that's what we're working on I'm trying to build a self-serve app store, so I don't have to be the one to provide every app, but can help with that conversation about which one you're going to use. Sorry, Chris, didn't mean to interrupt.
Corinne, also to highlight something you said there that I think is really poignant is that there's a phrase that I often hear, or at least I once heard, and it often comes ringing in my mind, is that people don't fear change. People don't resist change. They resist being changed. Meaning, if we were to come in and say, this is the app we're using as a specific language system first, they'd go, hell no. You know what I mean? Don't move my cheese. I'm really comfortable with this particular app. But if we were to take a slow roll to it and say, look, over the last, year and a half, 2 years, and we've been having this kind of facilitated process, student by student, look at what the data is showing. Could you help us formulate a more consistent approach so that kids aren't switching apps willy-nilly and we're not accidentally tripping over which app should be, then they're invited to help make that change. You'll have so much more buy-in. I think that's really wise.
That was my experience with the AT process. I just found myself in a district that was ready for change, and I had the chance to sit down with all the stakeholders and say, does this make sense to you? What would you change? And it was really collaborative. And I realized that wasn't just me, that's no reflection of my skill. That was just being in the right place at the right time when people were ready for it. And so I'm trying to read Bellingham and figure out when is our time. But this feels hopeful to me because it feels like there is something we can do to work towards the goal of that. Or I see a starting point for the collaborative.
And I think this is a good time, Amy, at least we at the beginning of the year, I think the tech thrown on us with having to be remote was astounding. I cannot even tell you all the different systems that I had to learn. From Skype Business to Zoom, everything in between. And so I think it's a good time to people are a little bit more open.
Maybe.
Yeah. I'm sorry, what?
Maybe they're feeling empowered that they can make judgments about the technology or.
Right, because they are like, hey, I know a little bit about technology now. I used to not only get on the computer to do my email, and now I can do all these other things. Mm-hmm.
So when you're making this, so let's say you take this slow roll and do it student by student and have this facilitated process, right? And you're making decisions, like I said, student by student. Something else you could be working on, maybe systemically, would be the implementation process, because like you said, Corinne, that seems also be like scatter plot, some people are implementing it well, some people are doing it with fidelity, others aren't, So again, something we sort of embraced in our neck of the woods was this impact model, where the idea is that we picked one salient thing. There's least to most prompting. There's the car and crowd strategy. There's wrap as a strategy. There's Master Pal and there's s'mores. And these are all these things that float out there as strategies to help people implement AAC. We picked one and said, we feel like this is the strategy we wanted to work on, which we picked s'mores. Other people have picked Master Pal. People have picked, again, maybe that's where the committee, how can we come up with what do we want to be our through line from schools and have a common vocabulary? And so essentially, how can we make people better modelers? That's what was our in our neck of the woods. That's the question we asked. And we picked s'mores as the terminology we use so that everybody would say, okay, we could put posters up there. Everyone would know what that means. We kind of drilled it and killed it in trainings and coaching sessions. But I guess that's not something that you would wait 3 years until you have a specific learning system approach that has evolved to. That's something that you could work together. Do you know what I mean? Like, okay, well, what's our implementation look like and how can we make that more consistent as well?
And I have a question about that. Who do you train? Do you go directly as like the AT? Do you go directly to everybody, or do you go to your SLPs and then rely on your SLPs to then go train the teachers and the teachers to train the paras? Just curious.
Yeah. So the way we did it and are doing it is that we did lead with the SLPs, but we did like our training on this one skill of modeling, not all the other nonsense. Like, oh, let me teach you about Proloquo and Lamp Words for Life. And let me teach you about all the different apps. And oh, let me teach you about, least to most prompting. It was, how do you model? You go slow. You model by talking about what the student's doing. You model talking about what we do. We talk about something we see in the environment we model. So, and we did that in a very slow. We spent the first quarter of a school year focusing just on the SLPs. Then quarter 2, 3, and 4, we spent on the teachers, them coming through trainings doing that. But let me be very clear about that. It was a two-pronged approach where there was trainings where you come and you learn about the concept and you practice a little bit with like partners. Imagine Corinne and I, you and I are teamed up. And so we're practicing modeling with each other. So when I go out with a student, I've got through the awkwardness of like, of what that feels like. And then we had a coaching experience where the AT person's role, but it could also be maybe one or two speech therapists that really jive on this kind of stuff. You know what I mean? They really are, they're really into it, are sort of coaches that say, okay, remember how we practiced the s'mores thing or that master pal thing? We have practice going slow. You're going to practice it with a student. I'm going to watch you do it. I'm going to record you doing it. Then we're going to look at this video and we're going to watch ourselves and we're going to reflect on it. Look, how did you think your modeling went there? And we're going to do, a number of sessions that way. So that you can become more confident in your skills. So it's not just knowledge, but it's also the practice. And so that's how we did it. We have yet to really tackle the paras, but that is sort of on the horizon. And then the third component there, Corinne, because you said like people are so ready for it with the technology, is a question that I'd be asking if I was revisiting. We're already into a process here, right? So you're crafting that process. Would be, in distance learning, you've probably spent a lot more time with parents than you ever have, right? In Zoom calls, and they're there with you when they're doing the experience. What kind of coaching could I provide to them so that, because that's going to be the consistent through line for the student's life, they won't run into the turnover of teachers. I mean, they'll always have that parent. So if we could spend more time coaching that parent and teaching them, maybe that's where I would be thinking about what we could do differently in our neck of the woods. Would be maybe, how can we get parents more involved in that training/coaching process? So I just threw a lot at you, but what are your thoughts there?
I'd like to ask Corinne a piggyback question about all of that. Like, how do you, given that there are so many demands on learning new technology and just the chaos that is schools right now, where do you think that kind of training would fit in the department's goals or our district goals? Like, could we make focus on modeling a priority, or would people view that as like, I only need that if I have students who use AAC? I hate to think that way, but I imagine some people do.
I think it would have to not be presented as a technology, like this is an additional technology skill, but actually like a professional development therapy skill. And we would have to go about it as that way. And yeah, they might know it, but it never hurts to learn more or learn different things. I mean, I followed Chris, I know CAR and crowd, but I actually don't know s'mores. So there's a lot for me to learn. So I think in our district, we're doing this unique thing right now where, and maybe it's not unique, maybe all districts are doing it. But because we have, staggered days that our kids are coming, and kids don't come on Wednesdays, they come Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday for the kids that are coming. I shouldn't say we have our entire district back. We don't yet. Wednesday is a lot more professional development. And so you're having different, and it lends itself to providing some information. Does that answer your question? Did I?
I'm really asking from a place of ignorance about the scope of speech practice. Like, would a given clinician feel like modeling is a skill that relates to the vast majority of their students, or would they feel like it's a specialized skill?
Well, I would say a specialized skill, because if you don't have an AAC, it doesn't quite fit the exact same way. I mean, we still model, it's just a little bit different is how I would probably answer that. However, given our schools, we now have preschools in nearly every developmental preschools, which that may be shifting a little bit. I'm not sure. We have so many different life skills. When I started in the district, I believe there were 2 schools with life skills. And now we have 1, 2, 3, 4 that I can think of off the top of my head. I might be missing one. Elementary schools with life skills. So there's just expanding. So the SLPs, your caseload may you could go 3 years without ever having a kid with AAC, and now we're not in that anymore. So I think it would be a more universal skill, because there's just more kids that need it. They're spread out a little bit more, and I think a lot of that comes with the technology. Chris, you might be able to speak to this, of inclusion, and rather than put all the kids from the district into one class at the north end of the school district, we're trying to put them into different schools closer to where they live. So,
sorry, people aren't watching the video. They're just listening. They didn't see me do my little jig there, my little dance. Yeah, you just talked yourself into it, Corinne. You started out thinking, I think it's a specialized skill. No, it's generalized. And you went right to it. It was fantastic.
Well, and I think at one point it was more specialized. And I think over time, we've definitely broadened more. And preschoolers coming in, and it's just different now. The district, a lot has changed. I mean, you mentioned the technology has changed, but so much has changed in 10 years that it's very different.
I think also the understanding and people becoming more and more familiar with AAC and that phenomenon that I was talking about of tier 3 becoming tier 1, people's eyes open more to and are more accepting of AAC as we don't have to wait. Like, let's provide it now. And because we know it doesn't hurt anybody, there's no harm in it. The worst thing that would happen is that we might provide somebody with a resource that they ultimately didn't need. You know what I mean? Or they used it for a while, and that's like least dangerous, right? Is we provided it to you and you said at some point, hey, no, thank you. I don't need this anymore. Great. So even if there is a handful of people that are like, I'm not sure I need this right now, they will. They don't know that they don't need it right now, but they will. It's coming,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It just takes one kid. One kid moves into your school and you need it.
That's what we saw happen in our preschool in the last district. And that SLP started doing aided language input, and it just took off for the whole program. And then it came up through the grade levels. So I'm under the impression that it's a really powerful universal approach. But I just wondered, what would people's impression be if we tried to pitch this as a
I think
goal?
It would be good. And the other thing is, I had a great education for my master's program, for my speech language pathology program, but we had a weekend class on AAC. A weekend, 2 days. That was it.
This comes up in the podcast all the time, Corinne, that the pre-service learning is lacking. Again, I think all of academia is trying to catch up as fast as possible. But that is a big boat to turn around. Do you know what I mean? It takes miles to turn that oil tanker. So, but it's getting better. There's more people are looking at AAC than ever before. But it's too late for you. You already did it. You're already
not going back to that.
You're not going back. Right. Yeah.
I have a question about how you might structure let's say we come up with a format for feature matching, and we try to do that for our individual students going forward. I can imagine the list of needs on the left, the column, and then the subsequent columns of each app. Is there a way to also factor in, maybe Corinne was pointing out how we have different types of users and different ideas about what it is to be a functional user. And so I was wondering if there's a way to incorporate that kind of information into this chart.
Well, yes and no. So you could have a chart that is sort of pre-filled. Our district believes in these sort of universal truths, So there's, for instance, a project that, Amy, were you ever a part of it at ATIA? The AAC Agreements? Did you ever?
I'm afraid not. I've heard about it, but I haven't been part of it.
Okay, so Corinne, what this is at these ATIA, it started at ATIA, which is a conference, a conference down in Florida every year on assistive technology. There's this event on Fridays we were talking about where you go and you sit around a table, right? And we talk about whatever we want to talk about. Well, one of the things that came up multiple years in a row was this thing called AAC agreements, because everyone seems to have these little variations on what they think is would be a universal truth in the field of AAC. Well, I think we should be doing this. I think we should be doing that. Well, what are some things we all agree on? And we created this website called the AAC Agreements, which are sort of things that we believe many AAC people who work in AAC believe are sort of universally accepted as these are true things that we should be working for. So you could take that, something like that, and you could pre-populate column number 1 with some of that, so that we knew these are things we don't have to negotiate at the table. We all agree these things are important. That said, I do feel like that could take away a little bit of that ownership of the decision-making process. Some of that was already made. So Amy, that's where your skill comes in as a facilitator or whoever's facilitating, right? To go, all right, everybody, what do we think starts in column 1? And people kind of look blankly at you and be like, well, do we believe we all want to learn language? Yes, we all believe that. All right, let's write that down, because you have that skill and your knowledge in your head that you could be guiding those questions and asking the questions in a way that gets them to fill out the thing in an appropriate manner. Do you know what I mean? Because you wouldn't, for instance, you wouldn't necessarily go, if you saw a team go, well, we think we think yes and no as a first step is an important thing. So we want to have 2 buttons. Can you write that down in the first column? You'd know, and alarms would be going off in your head like, no, we don't want yes and no to be, and we have to wait and they get 2 buttons. So you'd have to be thinking about, okay, what makes you think yes and no would be good? How do you feel like that's going to help them learn language? That's the skill that you would be sort of practicing and drawing out in people to get them to the fact that, oh yeah, maybe that's not what we want. Does that help at all?
I'm going to remain hopeful that the district will continue to embrace me and invite me to those meetings, and that I'll have time in my schedule, because I can imagine that kind of conversation in a theoretical context, but given my current constraints, I think it's going to be more like sharing a static resource that might be used in a meeting where I'm not in attendance.
Gotcha. Well, so a couple thoughts here. Could the professional learning that you were talking about, could that be sort of part of it? Is let me teach you how to do whatever this process is called, whatever we call it, resource consideration, right? So could I help you through the process of what resource consideration looks like? Here's a fictional student, Now you guys walk through what kind of questions did you ask to get the student the tools you think they need, so that someone like Corinne would be leading that meeting at her IEP meetings, and then come to you, not for a tool, but be like, okay, I need to talk to somebody. This is what happened in this meeting, or here's what I'm anticipating happening. But can you give me some pointers on what you think I should do?
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering too, with me being here and being present, and I have students. I have one student that I think I just emailed you, Amy, about how I'm not sure about the trial, whether it's working. We can try it. Like, I can put those meetings together and we can start at my school. And I have a couple kids that we could just, like one girl, she just moved in and she had AAC and we don't know what she had. They think she had Proloco, but and so we could maybe try that. And then that would give you some practice. And then we could see the feasibility and say, hey, look, it works or whatnot. I also had a question. I don't know. I don't want to move on too quickly.
That's okay.
I mentioned that our district has really invested in the past in PECS. And so I think there's a little bit in at least I have felt this way. I can't speak for everybody else, but I've heard this. Can't move on to an iPad. You can't move on until we get PECS, until we go through PECS first. And so then I think that's a little bit of a roadblock, like, oh, well, I haven't done PECS with this kid yet. And well, I don't really have the resources. So, we're not going to do anything. I don't know if that happens elsewhere.
All over the place. Yes.
All over the place. So what do you do? What are your thoughts on that? Like, do you need PECS beforehand, or can you just jump in? What are your thoughts? And how do you combat that? This is for you, Chris. And how do you combat that? If that is the culture in our district of, well, we can't do this until we have PECS. And Amy came in and she does not have that mindset. And so that's been refreshing because I don't have to say, well, I'm going through PECS. But I mean, even a teacher just the other day, well, we haven't done PECS yet, but.
So there's a couple ways. One, I can tell you how I broke my own mindset of that. So, because I used to be that way. I was that person, which you're describing, and I think there's a lot of people that way. So the first process I went through and it took me 15 years to come to this, right? Is I saw students start and end in the school district that were using PECS. And here's just a good question to ask. How many people do you see walking out on the last day of school using PECS? Where are proficient PECS users? Where are the kids that say, thank you so much, Miss Nelson, for teaching me PECS? Do you know what I mean? That's the strategy I needed to get me over the hump. I'll shout it from the rooftops. Please bring me those students and tell me who they are, because then I'll change my mind. But otherwise, I don't see that happening. So there's no evidence that I can find that backs up the claim that that is a precursor to anything else, or that it's a strategy that actually works. You know what I mean? In the long run, there might be some short-term gains, but I believe those short-term gains could also be happening with robust AAC that doesn't negatively impact the motor planning or the learning of language. Meaning I'm keeping the buttons in the same spot. So instead of doing, this is a visual, but reaching out and grabbing a piece of paper and handing it to somebody, or using my finger to point to reaching to a finger and pointing and pressing a button, that motor plan seem consistent for the rest of my life, where ripping off a piece of paper doesn't. So that's one, is show me the evidence. Where is it working? The second thing, and I guess that's the same question that I would ask, is what evidence do we have that backs up the claim that PECS is a precursor to anything else? And in fact, I think you can find much more evidence that suggests that it's not, that there are AAC users out there that have never even heard of PECS or seen PECS, and they might be very thankful of that because they were using a robust language system from the get-go. They were having consistent motor plans. They weren't changing where the buttons were. They had people teaching them about language as opposed to requesting, So I don't know. Are those some ways to maybe consider that might break down that wall? I think there's one other thing too. One of the reasons we, meaning a culture of our country and possibly the world, is that back in the day, AAC was $5,000 to get something, So if you're looking at that for all the kids that might possibly need it, it immediately becomes too expensive of a solution. So we've convinced ourselves that the low-tech paper solution works because, man, I don't want to say I don't want to say I haven't been that. I don't want to say that my therapy hasn't been effective. Do you know what I mean? So, so now that the AAC is much more inexpensive, do you know what I mean? I mean, we're talking less than $1,000 or $1,200 for a solution for someone's life. That's a very doable number, I think, in most places. Do you know what I mean? There's still, obviously, I don't know your demographics, or people listening might go, what? That's still, I mean, people struggle for resources everywhere, but it's much more doable than 5,000,
Yeah. Thanks.
There's one other thing I kind of want to bring up there. I keep mentioning this motor planning, and you sort of suggested it, Amy, something that is, I don't know, a red flag that comes in my head about your former district, because what I hear a lot of people doing, and I see a lot of it in Facebook groups and the social media that I follow and the videos that I see, and when I go to conferences, I see people talking about it, is sort of a universal core board. And I caution people about that. Nothing about, I love the idea of core boards, right? But the idea that it is not a precursor to a more robust system, meaning I'd want it to be a precursor, or I'd want it to be a something that flows with a more robust system because of that phenomenon of motor planning. Meaning, I take this sort of randomized core board, and I've got random core words on there because I learned about core vocabulary, and I've been told that this core will work. I provide it to students, and it does work. They're making progress on the core boards. I see them modeling on it. I see them using it. So, but then at some point, if I really believe they're going to have access to thousands of words, then I got to rip that sucker out of their hand and I got to give them something more, or I got to add a new system on top of it. Yeah, you could still use that old system sometimes, but now I got to add something where the words are in a different spot. Go is not this motor plan anymore. It's now a different one. So I kind of like the idea of using a core vocabulary board that is in line. It's like a screenshot of the homepage of Lamp Words for Life, Pro, Low, Quo, whatever that specific language system first approach thing is that you choose. What are your thoughts on that?
I didn't mean to cut you off. That's what we did. We designed the core board in Pro, Low, Quo, and then we made sure that file was available for installation on the classroom devices, and so that the layout was similar.
Exactly. Now you have a flow, right?
Right. And my understanding, again, as coming from outside of the speech field, is that functionally your high-tech system just isn't always going to work, and you're going to need, every high-tech system should come with the low-tech system for those scenarios where it's glare from the sun or whatever, your device isn't charged. So that's why a red flag would come up if someone said this is a precursor and then we'll go here, but and we'll abandon the whole thing. It's always a package deal in my mind.
100%. Every person who I've met who's a AAC user is their primary form of expression is some sort of, they also have multiple tools in the same way that sometimes I use a pen and sometimes I use sticky notes and sometimes I use a phone and sometimes I use a keyboard. Primarily I communicate with my voice. Primarily they're using their robust system, their robust app. But then there's all these other ways for alternative situations that they might use.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we're running low on time, but how does that all sound? Any kind of final thoughts or takeaways? Where are you thinking from where you came to this meeting to a meeting of the minds to where you're leaving? What are your thoughts?
I've got some work to do. I've got some more learning to do to lead those collaborative discussions effectively, but that's okay because I enjoy the learning. So I do feel energized, and I feel really grateful, Corinne, that you're willing to go on this journey with me.
Yeah, similar. I feel a lot of learning I need to do. I don't see it necessarily as my role as the catalyst of change, but I am happy to help and be there with Amy as she does this. And so maybe someday that will be my role. I don't know. But yeah, so it's a lot. And as an SLP, I just being told you have more to do is always terrifying and daunting, but to be walked through it rather than just told is different. So
yeah, wouldn't you rather be part of it, right, than imposed on you? Sorry, Amy, go ahead.
This conversation broke down this larger goal into some steps that would feel more like involving the stakeholders as opposed to designing some system that was, we're going to implement on this date. So I appreciate that we've been able to break it down into some actionable steps that fall in line with how I see my role as it was designed, not necessarily how I envision it. It's just consistent with what we are all already doing and want to do better every day.
Well, thank you both for coming on the podcast, for sharing everything that you've shared, and especially your open mind to all of these new ideas, and your willingness to try and figure this out for your district. I champion both of you as being agents of change. Because if you guys don't do it, then who's going to do it? So I appreciate you coming on and this great discussion. Thanks for reaching out, Amy.
Thank you, Chris. This was super exciting to me as a big fan of the podcast. So I appreciate it a lot.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
Bye.